Poverty Summit, the 16th Annual Poverty Summit, and a debate between the two candidates running to lead Salt Lake City. And I am Roger McDonough with KCPW Public Radio, and in an effort to save as much time to hear from the candidates themselves, I'm going to jump directly into the rules of today's debate between State Senator Luz Escamilla and Salt Lake City Councilwoman Erin Mendenhall. This will be a roughly 45-minute debate, which is not a lot of time. That means we really have to stick to the time allotted. The rules of the debate are as follows. We're going to give each of the candidates 1 minute for an opening statement. After that, we will have a list of 6 questions each will be responding to, and because our time is limited, candidates will have just 2 opportunities for a rebuttal. Those rebuttals will be 1 minute in length, and I'm going to be iron-handed about keeping you to that minute, so my apologies in advance to both of you for screaming time's up at you. There are going to be no closing statements, and just quickly to indicate if you have a rebuttal, simply raise your hand and we will make it happen. We've got a timekeeper here in the front row, as you know, who has signs that they'll be holding at the 25-second mark, and then when you are out of time, and once the 5 questions have been asked, answered, and occasionally rebutted, we'll be done. And I think the Poverty Summit will be close to wrapping up as well. So members of the audience, please hold your applause, your comments, your exasperated sighs, your guffaws, and your exclamations of support until the debate is over, with the exception of right now as we welcome both of the candidates. Each of the questions and statements being made this afternoon now, I believe, were decided by a coin toss, and Senator Luz Escamilla, you get to kick things off with your opening statement of 1 minute. She needs audio. Let's switch. How does it on?
Can you use this on this? Good afternoon, almost. My name is Luz Escamilla, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you, Roger, Bill Tibbetts, and all the amazing advocates that are working really hard to end poverty. This is a great pleasure. As someone that worked for Utah Issues, Center for Poverty Research Action, remember those years, I've had a chance to be a healthcare policy analyst. So we're fighting for Medicaid, not expansion during that time, but Medicaid for all, healthcare for all. So I love this conference. It's very close and dear and in the core of who I am and why I'm in public service. So just really quick, this will require a comprehensive approach. We have to do a lot, but part of what we're gonna do is work in collaboration. And the first thing I wanna do is congratulate my opponent, the good councilwoman, and looking forward to working with her as we move forward for solutions and having a civil dialogue when it comes to who's going to be the next mayor and how we're going to work together. And I know I'm out of time, and thank you so much. Looking forward to getting into the deep answers here.
And Councilwoman Mendenhall.
Thank you for having me, Roger, Bill, Glenn, even Tim. It's always good to be with you. I'm teasing because I've had the privilege of working with Crossroads Urban Center housing advocates since I became a council member, even before that in 2013 when I was running the first time. And I'll tell you, there is no greater long-suffering housing advocates in the state of Utah than those people who have organized and continue to organize the Poverty Summit. Thank you for all you've taught me. Yes, they are moving the needle with your help. We are moving the needle on affordable housing. Between 2009 and 2016, we knew that income was rising at only 0.31% and housing costs were rising at over 1%. We added 85,000 new households in that time. And between 2016 and today, our city council, as you heard earlier, has done more on affordable housing than the state of Utah has. $47 million we have leveraged with private investment. I know how to have this conversation. I'm excited to have it with you today. I thank you for moving the needle with us, and I'm out of time. Thanks.
All right, on to the questions of today's debate, which were chosen by Crossroads Urban Center and myself as questions central to the Poverty Summit. And I'm going to mention to the candidates to please feel free to ask me to repeat the question if you want. I'm going to be saying it one time, and then the second candidate, if you want to, who's responding, ask me again, please do. And the first has to do with community engagement, and the first to answer will be Senator Luz Escamilla. Many residents of West Side communities feel that the city does not engage their neighborhoods in the same manner as they do East Side areas. In particular, residents have had problems engaging staff at the city transportation and planning departments. What would you do as mayor to ensure that all city residents have the opportunity to become adequately involved in the decisions that impact their neighborhoods? Will you personally meet with residents at the beginning of your term to address those concerns?
Is this 3 minutes?
This is a 2-minute, these are all 2 minutes, as a matter of fact.
Thank you for the question. So as we talk about community engagement and building communities, it's about trust. And I have the opportunity to have a lot of experience working with underserved communities and actually having them to engage in government, in organizations that serve them. My job as a domestic violence outreach coordinator, that was my job, to work with the underserved communities, getting them help and domestic violence. The same with, as director of the Office of Ethnic Affairs, that was my job, connecting communities with government. So I feel that I have the expertise to move this forward. And the way we do that is we bring City Hall to neighborhoods. It's about empowering communities. You build trust through community organizations that already exist. And it's gonna be the role of the mayor and the city, in collaboration with the city council, to go to those organizations. Like Crossroads, is one of them, and they have to have, the city council, the community councils are tools in the toolbox. So there's already infrastructure of communities and organizations that already have those communities working with them. We just now need to bring City Hall to them. Part of how we do that is I will have a group of navigators, that we're gonna call them, in City Hall. If you go right now to City Hall, you know where to go. If you're a community that you're probably facing needs, and the city is the first place you go. Usually you start in city, local government as you're seeking for services. And it could be the more basic stuff. So my goal is to provide navigators within the city. And as we have more community meetings, as we do the work that I've done of grassroots organizing for years since I was in college, I'm ready to make sure people feel that they're part of city government and that city government is part of their lives. And we will do that with interpreters, with community building, and going through organizations. Thank you.
And Councilwoman Mendenhall, the same question to you. Do you need it repeated?
You asked a few questions.
I know that.
Actually, I think I got it though. Residents are correct that the city at City Hall does not engage the same with the west side of our community as it does with the east side of our community. Socioeconomic access to being able to even show up at public meetings is a problem, and it's part of the reason that we have different conversations and different representation. That's unacceptable. Salt Lake City Council, when we created the West Side Master Plan recently, a couple of years ago, did something new. We went to the community instead of requiring that the only way we'd listen to their feedback was for them to come to us. That's the kind of proactive engagement that needs to be at every conversation that has to do with the communities and the neighborhoods. What I love about being on the city council, and what I've said about it all along, is the lowest rung in the ladder of government. It is closest to the grass tops. It's really like a good neighbor position. I love that about it. But what that also means is you go to community council meetings a lot. I've been at community council meetings for the last 7 years consistently. And when you look at the endorsements I've received from the community council members, chairs in my district, it tells you that I know how to listen, how to respond, and how to convene to feed the needs and serve the needs of our communities. That's where all of this happens. That's why we live in Salt Lake City. This is a special community. You don't live on, if you live in Salt Lake City, you choose to live here. It's not necessarily cheaper or easier. And it's because the community that we bring actually moves mountains together. We do a lot. We need to do that better at City Hall. I wanted to mention that as mayor, I will work with every city council member to hold a town hall every year in each district of our city. We need the mayor and the cabinet of the mayor going out into the community, listening, being in the locations. That's something we haven't had with our past mayors, and something I will bring to this conversation. But absolutely, community is where it's at, and that's where I've been for the last 6 years.
A rebuttal from Senator Luz Escamilla.
Thank you. I just want to expand on the importance of trust and how do you close this disparity and gap, especially with the communities of color, refugee and immigrant communities, which we are, as the most diverse city in the state. I think that's going to be critical, and representation does matter. And communities are very afraid of government and what it means to communicate with government. Part of, I think, of the disparity has been the discrepancy on working together between city council and the mayor. And I'm excited for that opportunity to close that process and make sure that we're going as one team versus two separate groups. There is obviously the difference between the legislative branch and the executive branch, but if we are coming together as a team, then you'll have trust, which is part of what our residents are struggling right now. And that disparity in the west side is real, and if you talk to the west side, they're angry. A lot of it has been what's happened with in the board in the Northwest Quadrant development as well.
All right, this next question is the first of three related to low-income housing, and Erin Mendenhall is first in line here. There is general agreement that Salt Lake City is in the midst of a crisis in affordable housing. This is a particularly difficult issue for low-income residents who increasingly struggle to pay the rent, while market rate and luxury apartments are being built at an unprecedented rate. What would be your plan for developing more affordable and low-income housing in our city? And can you talk about the actual number of affordable housing units you would push to see built as well?
Yeah, when I started on the city council, Ralph Becker announced an initiative to build 5,000 doors. You might remember that one. Now we're talking about more like 7,500 doors. And as our population along the Wasatch Front grows toward 5 million, which it will surpass by 2050 statewide, we are growing here as a city, and the need for affordable housing grows proportionately. We need to acknowledge that the mayor doesn't control the housing market. We do have our hands and can find there are some really key levers. And I think that's a good illustration of why I'm running. I think it's important that Salt Lake City has a mayor who knows how city government works, how to use it effectively, efficiently with our precious taxpayer dollars, and then bring the most to changing affordable housing as we can. I love Salt Lake City. I've lived here through different stages of affordability in my life. I loved Councilmember Gorbani's sharing about her childhood. I was born into a double-wide trailer myself, and my parents worked their way into more stable housing. But unfortunately, we know in Salt Lake City, about 50% of our renters pay more than 30% of their income. That means, and you know this, it's not stable housing for half of the people renting in Salt Lake City. So how do we move those levers better? We've been working on this, particularly since I put together a $21 million fund through the RDA about 2 years ago. We brought $21 million to the private development community to say, we need more affordable housing. We're willing to give you low interest loans in order to make that housing happen. Councilmember Wharton mentioned we've had over 1,500 units created so far, and there are hundreds more in the pipeline that we're aware of. $47 million brought to the table. No city in the state has ever done what this city council has done. And I'm proud to say I've helped to lead on that. But going forward, we've got another $10 million on the table right now of notice of funding availability through the RDA. And when I was the chair of the council last year, we did a critical step through the Funding Our Future conversation. We created ongoing revenue for the Housing Trust Fund that we didn't have before.
Luz Escamilla, the same question to you.
Thank you. So when we talk about low-income housing, and I think what we're, part of my message is we talk about community stabilization. Because we can be in low-income housing, depending what situation happens to you, how many people are literally a paycheck away from, or catastrophic illness away from homelessness, or ending in seeking low-income housing. So part of it has to be this very comprehensive approach of dealing with every single aspect of the city. One is, as we move to inclusionary zoning, making sure this is happening from east to west, north and south. That's a big problem that we have. It will require this collaboration between city mayor's office and the city council to go to the neighborhoods and explain that we need to have this low-income housing and even middle-income housing. Nobody's talking about middle-income housing. So we're going to have this really, really very high-priced housing and just low-income housing, and we need to stabilize that. And so the middle-income housing needs to be part of the conversation. No one has talked about that, but that will require this collaboration. And east and west to combine, not all the low-income housing happening on the west side. And I know that's going to be tough conversations, and some people don't like being in front of angry constituents, but we need to have it. And I'm trained to do that as a legislator. We deal with all these situations all the time, but we need to attack this from this full multifaceted, every angle approach. But we also need to bring some wraparound services to that conversation, even for the low-income housing. So we do a lot of wraparound services and conversation of case management for individuals experiencing homelessness. We also need that to stabilize for people that are low-income housing. And then look at the different populations. Not everyone is in the same angle. And I have the ability to have experience on all those different angles through my experience, not only legislative experience, but also working in banking with businesses and understanding how some of those services really make a difference in the life of people.
We will turn to the topic of
Can I do
a rebuttal. Sure, yeah, rebuttal from Erin Mendenhall.
Thank you. Just a few more points. I think that it's critical that we make it a priority as a city, talking about knowing how to use our tiny levers or big levers most effectively. We're recruiting businesses to this city all the time, and the city participates in different ways to support the kind of investment we want to see in the city. What we need to do better, and what we started to do better with Stadler Rail and a couple of others, is to bring businesses here that are going to pay better. They're going to pay a living wage. We know that for the average rent today, you got to make $17 an hour. Our average renter makes $13 an hour. Our minimum wage is $7.25. City Hall, not any city in this state can raise the minimum wage. The state's prevented that. But what we can do is target our investments as a city on businesses that are going to pay better. We can do that. We also need to prevent the loss of housing, and Tim mentioned this in an earlier session. We have some zoning proposals from the administration before the city council today that would make it easier to tear down what is currently affordable, naturally occurring affordable housing. We got to have our eyes wide open about this.
Sure. Escamilla, your rebuttal.
Thank you. One of the biggest pieces we need to also address is the different tools. So we right now are talking about development of housing and affordability. Part of it is we have to bring penalties for developers that want to, destroy affordable housing and build not affordable housing. Then there should be penalties attached to it. And I think the city has the ability to do that. At the same time, we need to be talking about a home repair program. So if you think about fixed income, our seniors that are in fixed income, if those property taxes keep increasing, how are they going to keep up? I mean, we're moving them from maybe a stable housing to now potentially homelessness or seeking other assistance. So part of the work, I think, of the mayor's having the vision to bring all the stakeholders to the table, have this visionary piece where everyone has a different situation, but the city should be ready to work with the federal government, the state, and other municipalities addressing this issue. And I'm excited for that opportunity because as we're talking with all the stakeholders, so many ideas are possible. We just need to get them all at the table, and I can do that.
We'll turn to the topic of the winter overflow shelter now. And Erin Mendenhall, you are first up to answer this question. With the transition from the Road Homes Rio Grande shelter to 3 new resource centers, we are reducing our capacity to shelter homeless people on any given night by something around 300 beds, something like 300 beds. Furthermore, each of the new shelters, as well as the existing family shelter in Midvale, have hard caps on capacity and will not be allowed to expand in bad weather. What will you do as mayor to make sure we have adequate shelter capacity for everyone who wants to come inside, especially during the winter months?
Whether people are housed or not, they are our neighbors and they need our help. We cannot turn our backs on them, and we cannot be unprepared when winter comes for the possibility that the new homeless resource centers, I have to make a slight correction there. You said that the beds aren't the same, the capacity is not the same. There's the same number of beds, but the capacity potential at the road home today, as you know, is quite limitless in some ways, and the new homeless resource centers have a hard cap. That's a difference. And of course, we're working with the state and the county to try to expand opportunities to divert people from even experiencing homelessness and to find other faster routes to housing in the first place. But this is a problem that what you're talking about can't wait until January when one of us takes the seat as mayor. And so I started working on this several months ago with the Lieutenant Governor and Department of Workforce Services, because as a council member, and hopefully as your future mayor, I would rather be blamed for being prepared for a humanitarian crisis than for not being prepared and having people freeze on the streets. I am optimistic that by partnering with the state, the county, DWS, we will have a temporary emergency solution, but it is temporary. And for us to really address the crisis, we need to do 4 main things. We need to grow access to affordable housing. And I want to interject here that geographic equity is a theme that I've worked on in City Hall, and I'm going to continue to press so that we don't continue to concentrate access to affordable housing in one area of our city. It needs to be across the city. We need to support programming that prevents evictions and that helps people keep their housing. We need to expand programs that provide social and mental health, and of course that is in partnership. And we need to ensure that the city's doing everything we can through those partnerships to address and prevent the opioid epidemic that we're experiencing today. We need to be working all of these balls down the court at the same time.
Sorry, your time is
I
up.
knew you were going to come.
Ms. Escamilla, the same question for you.
So we've been in conversations from day one in the state legislature about this with DWS and also the stakeholders and the people that are providing the services, the service providers. So CCS, we had a great meeting with Catholic Community Services. There's an opportunity at this point as a temporary Band-Aid, because it was a miss to think that we were going to go from 1,200 beds to the ability to have 200 people housed, which we do in the winter, to think that 700 beds were going to be sufficient. We can do the math, that doesn't work. So part of that right now is CCS is willing to do some retrofitting, and it will cost money, but I think it's doable. Can use some of their facilities that through the transition will be opening space and where they currently are to provide that bedding, emergency sheltering, but that's not the solution. I think we need to start talking about the different populations, beyond even 5 groups on the populations of people that are experiencing homelessness. Talk about sex workers that are now put in a very vulnerable position. And they're utilizing some of the hotels, and the city council is pushing to revitalize State Street, which is great, but we need to also make sure that vulnerable communities and populations are being taken care of. And the conversation needs to go even more with veterans and so forth. So part of it is we're missing part of that. The way we get there is by having resources coming from the state. We cannot stop our collaboration with the state. We can't do this alone with Salt Lake City. We don't even provide the mental health services. We don't have all the capacity for the wraparound services. We need to make sure that we're working with the state, with the county, and really get the resources that we need, and we do that through collaboration, which I feel I'm ready to do that because I know how to work with the state legislature, and I've done that successfully for 11 years. And there's another piece. The business community, they want to help. They just don't want to help where the people are fighting. And they've come to me. We've had a lot of meetings and conversations, and they're ready to invest on Salt Lake City so we can provide all those services for all those communities because we recognize them as our neighbors. Thank you.
Erin, did you want to rebuttal?
I did. I want to address two small bits. One is that yes, we are going to do this in partnership, and you've heard the good senator and me both talk about that critical relationship, but the state is not going to step in and save us from this. And as we heard an hour ago, the state is not doing its job on affordable housing. It is not showing up. And if you look at the funding over the years I've been on the council, the city knows how to and has the political will to do it. Yes, we need the partnerships, but we cannot wait in any way for something that isn't coming. I also want to mention, because the good senator mentioned State Street and human trafficking survivors, that as we have created the State Street project area, I've been working with the police department. I've gone to the drop-in center with the Refugee Association, and I recognize that we have been shrugging our shoulders about the displacement that happens as a redevelopment agency over the last 50 years of redevelopment in the city, and we cannot do it anymore. For the first time as a redevelopment agency, we wrote human trafficking and survivor resources into our plan so that we can spend money as it comes in on creating those services.
Just a note that both candidates have used their rebuttals now. We are, let's see, for this next question, we'll return to the topic actually of, or we'll stay with the topic of low-income housing. Housing, and Senator Escamilla will be first to answer here. With the pending development of Block 67 and the announced redevelopment plans for the property surrounding the Greek Orthodox Church on the block south, we're facing the very real possibility of losing hundreds of low-income housing units on the near west side over the next few years. This includes the subsidized Jackson apartments at 200 South and 300 West, as well as many naturally occurring affordable units in the area. What will you do to preserve our precious low-income housing and mitigate the impact of development in this area on low-income residents? And this is Senator Escamilla.
Thank you. One of the tools that I've mentioned before is penalizing those that develop with no affordable housing. I mean, that inclusionary zoning piece is critical. We need to be very conscious that it needs to happen across the city. The word is gentrification. And some people feel uncomfortable with that word, but it's real and it's happening. And again, is how do we protect all the different members of our community, from our seniors in our community with fixed income, people that are getting into SSI that takes 6 to 8 months to get their services and programs. How do we get them through this transitional housing and this process to stabilize them? The repair programs are critical. The landlord, we need the fund to make sure that increases the fund in the city that could help people work with landlords, and it's very predatory practices in the state of Utah, as you know. And we need to make sure that the city is adequately funding programs to help and protect those renters. And also, when we talk about low-income housing, now we talk about ownership. Talk only about renters, like these families and these individuals do not deserve to have home ownership. And the key part is, how do we bring all the other conversations? Wages, that good councilwoman mentioned the $17 hours. The new study is showing actually $23 an hour in order to survive in Salt Lake City and pay a $1,400 a month rent, which is probably 1 to 2 bedrooms. If you're a family, you can't do it. So how are we as a city going to be leading in conversations with relationship to the RDA and the thresholds that we're putting on type of jobs that are going to be coming to our city? I mean, it's this very comprehensive conversation about sustainability from all these angles, whether it's housing, employment, workforce, economic development, and healthcare and mental health in a comprehensive manner. And that's where we need the collaboration, because we don't do that in the city. And that's why I will be leading as your next mayor.
Excuse me. Okay, we're gonna now turn to a question.
Wait, I didn't answer.
You didn't answer the question yet. Well, okay, I guess you can answer.
Do I get double time for that? Just kidding. You started with Block 67, and this has come up already today as well, but the Jackson apartments are not part of the redevelopment proposal that cuts like a diagonal through Block 67. As you know, the Jackson apartments are separately owned. We've heard they're for sale, but the important part, and I want to thank Tim Funk for teaching me this months and months ago, is that unlike many affordable housing vouchers that are held by the tenant, the affordability of Jackson Apartments is held by that property owner. And there's 80 units there of affordability where there's a relationship between HUD and that property owner. Now, whether or not that property owner sells, we can't control. But what we need to be doing as a city is inserting ourselves to that conversation with HUD to make sure that if it sells, that those 80 units get to stay in Salt Lake City, whether in a new development or they're parceled out to a bunch of smaller developments. We need to keep that affordability here, whether it's in the Jackson or if the Jackson goes away. That's the kind of initiative and the creativity that City Hall needs to be bringing. We have a very challenged housing stock. Our natural affordability is slipping away. And so when you talk about preserving, yeah, there's some zoning before the city council right now from the administration that would make it easier to scrape houses and put up big market rate apartments. Without inclusionary zoning, that's happening. It's happening today. Houses I've lived in are gone, and now there's market rate housing there. You know what I'm talking about. So we need a city hall that understands the impact as best as we can, because we're in conversation constantly with the housing advocates who know it even better, to say, you might want to consider that these kind of changes, although they mean to do this, are going to end up doing this. And that's the kind of conversation we've been having for the last 6 years. We need to have our eyes open. about the consequences for well-meaning decisions, and then be able to target our precious taxpayer dollars to saving what we need to save.
Okay, now we'll turn to the next question. The first answer here will be Luz Escamilla. This is a question about the impact of another Winter Olympics potentially coming to Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake City could be the host for the 2030 or the 2034 Winter Olympic Games. The mayor is going to play a key role in planning for the games. How will you make sure that diverse community voices are included in that planning? And how can the process of preparing to host the Olympic Games be used to advance its long-term policy goals like better air quality and more affordable housing?
The possibility of hosting the Olympics, I think Utah, it's a natural for that, and it depends what angle you look at. What happened in the 2001 Olympics, and I had a chance to be an intern during 2001 Olympics. It was an interesting experience. Part of it, I think, is what the city needs to be very focusing is the inclusiveness. How do we include every single Salt Lake City resident? So if we're hosting it, we're going to be the host. And it's not only for the very privileged people that happen to maybe enjoy some of those winter sports. Not everyone gets a chance to enjoy winter sports. They're very expensive. So how do we make it an experience so everyone in Salt Lake City also enjoys part of that process? I think you need someone that could understand and build trust with the community and organizations and everyone in the Salt Lake City. The other one is we need community-based agreements for the Olympics. I mean, how do we bring them to participate and make decisions and be part of the decision process? So it's not only some people in Switzerland or whatever making those decisions for how that will look for Salt Lake City, because there will be an impact in our infrastructure. More importantly, how this combines to housing and low-income housing. All housing built for the Olympics must be affordable and restricted past the Olympics. We need to do that. That didn't happen in the previous Olympics. So we need to make sure that those housing units remain affordable and benefited for the city. That's our job. If that's not the case, then maybe Salt Lake City should be reconsidering whether they want to host or not. And this is a big effort because this requires the state, the federal government puts money, the Olympics puts money. So if that's going to be the case, and Salt Lake City is going to disturb life for a period of time and construction and so forth, that at least those units need to be staying here in the city as affordable and deed restricted. So that will be where I think we need to be focusing and see it as a benefit, but also that everyone can be part of that process and make sure the city protects them.
All right, Erin Mendenhall, the same question on the Winter Olympic Games and its potential impact for you.
I want to broaden the Winter Olympic Games to the reality that we've already talked about. We're growing as a city, we're growing as a region, our population is growing, investment is growing, and how we grow matters, who we decide to grow with and who we participate with matters. And so I could talk about the Winter Olympics in a similar way that we could talk about businesses we want to recruit here and who do we want to invest in. The Olympics could breeze through town and be like the circus and you never knew it was there and it didn't benefit us unless we get our hands around it and make sure we get the most out of it that we can. I agree that affordable housing needs to be the housing that's built and that it needs to be deeded to the city and deeded affordable going forward. Absolutely. But we need to make sure that the jobs that are employed through the Olympics are livable wage jobs. The transit investment that's coming here, we have a transit master plan. As you might have noticed, the first 3 circulator buses hit the streets almost 3 weeks ago tomorrow. There's more for us to implement. The Olympics and other future investment could be a way for us to expedite our transit implementation, making it more affordable and increasing our quality of life. But these need to be community-guided decisions. And much like the qualified opportunity zones, which we're not talking about, but they're here in the city, we're sitting in them, qualified opportunity zones are attracting tens of millions, hundreds of millions of future investment dollars. And if the city doesn't come up with an investment prospectus, as other cities have, that captures that momentum and makes sure we get what we need out of it, they're going to come in, make investments, and we aren't necessarily going to benefit the way we could. So the same goes for the Olympics, as it does for other future investment, from the qualified opportunity zones to the tech ecosystem I want us to have here in Salt Lake City, which is the highest paying, fastest growing industry in the state, and we haven't done what we should to make sure we have those jobs here in Salt Lake City.
All right. Our sixth and actually final question is going to be a return to the topic of affordable housing, and Councilwoman Erin Mendenhall, you will kick things off here. Over the past decades, Salt Lake City has seen a significant decline in the number of single-room occupancy hotels. A report in the Deseret News said that Salt Lake City had 800 SRO rooms a few decades ago. That dropped to 50 rooms, all of them in just one hotel by last year. The city, a decade ago, also tore down 3 SRO hotels on State Street to make room for new development. All of that is prelude to a simple question: what role should SROs play in affordable housing in Salt Lake City?
Thank you. And I appreciate that all of you have been in the audience, or some of you were here for the previous discussion. SROs has been talked about. It needs to keep being at the top of our conversation as a community, because we had a public hearing a few months ago when the administration was asking us to move ahead with an expansion of SROs. Technically it is, but it really follows North Temple and the State Street corridor pretty acutely. And the reasoning for that is, in one part, proximity to transit, but that's not the only place that's close to transit in the city, and that the existing zoning supports that kind of housing. Well, I have a problem with that. Our existing zoning is based, not intentionally or not, I hope not intentionally, it has racist and other overtones that are accidentally perpetuated when we continue to rely on old zoning as future housing needs. That is not geographic equity. And so as a council member, I asked the planning department to take it back and come back to us with a proposal that better reflected geographic equity and access to all types of housing, which we keep talking about, but it's gonna take intention for us to do it. Why don't we have SROs following the tracks line up to the University of Utah? Well, they'd say it's the zoning that doesn't allow it. Well, that's not geographic equity. We're continuing to concentrate affordable housing in one area of the city. So to answer your question, the city absolutely has a role in expanding SROs, and how we expand them can be the way we've always done things, or it can be the way we should do things in the future, and it needs to be equitable. I don't know if SROs, just like ADUs, we use so many acronyms. Does everybody know and have a good idea of what an SRO is? Dorm style housing. Basically, you don't have a kitchen or a bathroom of your own, you get to share those amenities. And our good friend Pamela Atkinson, who has carried conversations on and on with our homeless friends, tells us that so many people who don't want to access the shelters want a home. They just need a room. They ask for only a room.
Senator Escamilla.
Thank you. Single room occupancy opportunities need to happen and be made possible in all zones throughout the city. And that's going to be the biggest challenge. It's not going to be an easy task, especially close to the high frequency transit routes. Guess where those are? The east side. Yay. So this is going to require that the good councilwoman and I work together, the mayor, and make this happen. It's going to be tough. We're going to need your help. This is we need to have a frank conversation. NIMBYism, not in my backyard, is real. And we actually faced some fights on this issue. So the reality is, single room occupancy is actually that transitional housing that's needed for many individuals that could really help them stabilize. But you can do it only with wraparound services. If there is no comprehensive case management attached to this, when we're addressing right now the crisis, which is homelessness, then it's not gonna succeed. And we've seen them fail. So if we're gonna invest, if we're gonna pick this, battles of doing this, which is critical, and that we're saying east, west, north, south, and stop gentrification and focusing on all zones, especially the ones with high frequency transit, we are gonna have to do this with wraparound services. We just ranked 51 out of 50 states plus the District of Columbia, the last in the nation when it comes to mental health for adults in the state. So the counties are the ones that deliver those services. We're gonna need more money, more services from the state in collaboration with the county, and that's what I'm committed to do as your next mayor. We will work together. It's not gonna be easy, but I know we can do it. It's all about relationships. I know we can move forward, and this single room occupancy pieces can be very helpful as we do this with wraparound services. Without that, we're not gonna succeed. And eventually when we stabilize, I know we will get there. We will never end homelessness, but when we get stable, then those can be used for students also, and for people that work and commute, and we're here for 3 days a week, and they can use them as well. Thank you.
That completes this debate between the candidates running to become mayor of Salt Lake City here at the 2000